All right, hello everyone. We are live now. I've got special guest shrimp in the corner here. Local shrimp-shaped blob of Mathblob. Want to say hi?
Hi.
All right, so we're gonna let a couple people trickle in today, but the plan is that we're gonna do some casted carrier nonsense later in the day. But to preamble, kind of lead up to that, we're gonna do a bit of educational content because I know everyone loves learning the new patch. We've had about 24 hours to get their feet wet with this, so I believe Mathblob, you had written one of the guides on kind of missile warfare and stuff. The comprehensive craft clobbering compendium for chick and comely captains.
Yes,
had fun with that
is. I always have an alliteration for the name of all of my guides.
I can relate to that. I do some writing for tabletop stuff, and you get a little carried away with it, so I feel it.
This one took the longest out of all of them, I'm pretty sure.
All right, let me just go ahead and I'm gonna actually sticky that on the stream for this, so this way I can have people go ahead and take a look at that one. So if they want to cross-reference or just look at it themselves, because I know not everyone delves into the CM guide area. But all right, so if anyone watching, listening, etc. wants to go take a look at that, you can. It's available on Steam or through the little link you can click on that. Anyways, since I've got you here, let's talk missiles then, shall we? I'm just gonna load up, I don't know, just grab like Amethyst Squadron. So craft missiles, there's a lot of little things that go into the warfare as we've seen through the carriers and no doubt experienced ourselves. So you want to just kind of like walk me through, like, let's say, hey, I'm a new carrier player, I'm a local pace enthusiast. What do I want to know going in for like missile warfare combat in the age of carriers?
Well, all right, let's see, what does this have? Okay, so above all, missiles are kind of a bit of an esoteric topic. There's a lot of work that goes into tuning them and making them good. And while pretty much anyone can do it if they are willing to put in the time and have a basic understanding of how the general mechanics work, a lot of the time people are going to be lazy and they are going to steal from others. So there's no shame in that. Yep. I can say that most of the testers pretty much just took the missiles that other people have made, and
it's kind of just a natural, like, cumulative evolution of missile warfare where it's like, hey, this makes sense to do this.
I mean, it happens with like offensive missiles too.
Yeah, we noticed that with
Neb has been a thing, really.
Yeah, you saw torpedoes where people figured out the optimum way to corkscrew those. Same with like certain hybrid loadouts, like just a common type of size 3 hybrid you just throw on basically anything.
Yep. Right. If the missile works, it works.
Yeah. So, taking a look at, let's start off small. Like, just say that I want to do some anti-ship war. Well, I say anti-craft warfare. We've got these little size ones we can start off with. I'm noticing that in Amethyst Squad, I've got 2 different types of them. I've got a smaller warhead and I've got a larger warhead one. What do we feel like the difference is made here? Like, just the little tunings you could do for some of these weapons.
Riposte block 4 and 5, I believe.
Yep. Looking at them, one's a size 3 warhead, other one's size 4.
Alright, the riposte block 5 is in the VLS, actually.
Ah, okay.
And this just looks to be an AMM. I also happen to have a guide on those, but nice. This is a pretty standard design. It's the max warhead base frag, which means it's cheap, and it can one-shot an S2H without hardened skin.
Just
and if you fire 2 of these,
winning that coin flip to one-shot it, because I think against hybrid missiles,
it's a 50-50 against all missiles. But you just fire 2 of them.
Yeah.
For 4 points, which is more efficient than firing 2 mini-L, which also gets you a lower probability of kill, because both need to hit.
Yeah, just depending on your kind of threat. So there's the AMM guide, but we're assuming people kind of are educated on that. But let's say that now that we've covered like the AMM type, this defensive, what about these ones, the riposte block 4s? These would be your
riposte block 4s. They are indeed in the magazine.
All right.
And these have a warhead that does 56 damage. Now, the Tanto happens to have 50 hit points. So this does enough damage.
Let me just pull up the Alliance starters. So if we take a look there, remember chat, it was 56 damage. If we look at the Tantos here, see the craft Tanto type, notice the frame integrity is exactly 50 with a skin thickness of 0.3. And that means what, Math?
It means that while this missile would have enough damage to one-shot a Tanto, it actually doesn't, because its armor penetration is only 0.18 centimeters, which doesn't beat the 0.3 of the Tanto, meaning it will end up doing half damage. Any Blast-Frag S1 you have will not be able to meet the armor threshold, so the most you can get out of these is a 2-tap. So you'll need 2 of these to hit to kill a craft with these missiles alone. If you have guns and stuff in the mix, of course, it might be enough to just lower their HP, but missiles alone, these will only 2-shot.
So worth noting, the damage mechanic is the same as it was when you had, say, flak firing against torpedoes in the past patch. If you don't have enough to pen through the armor, you do half damage. So you won't be one-shotting craft with the size 1 missiles, like Math had said. However, you can still cause them to juke and evade and potentially line up for a nice gun run. Or if you do get that hit after all, then you can take out half their health bar, which is still a pretty big advantage in a fight. I think the main appeal of the size 1s is really how cheap they are, right? Like with this Axe Seeker, I'm looking at only about 2 points per missile. I could put on something like, say, the Wake Seeker, that puts down to 1 point. Or I've seen some people doing a new little fun tech of the Home on Jam type, because there's been a lot of fightercraft with jamming pods around, and that's got some teeth to it.
Yeah, the S1s are very cheap. They are decently capable at their job, and honestly, with stuff like ACT especially, you're looking more for being able to force the craft to evade rather than actually killing them with the missiles, because if you are going to go for a dogfight, having the enemy evade first and then keeping them evading with more missiles and guns and stuff is incredibly good.
Means that they can't attack,
in a way,
and then you can get on their rear aspect, right?
Wake will that it does help with that. It does help with guns, which have a lot more damage potential, but of course are more situational because you do need to line up and actually hit them. But for Wake missiles, they are more to kill because you need to get in the dogfight first and have the enemy evasive first before craft will fire them. Because craft will look at the seeker of the missile and they will only fire them on aspects on which they'll work.
Right.
So Wake homing, they'll have to get behind the craft first to fire.
So potentially with a build we might see, here let me just do a hypothetical, I'll just duplicate one of these guys and make them into some Act Seeker stuff. I think I can add that, right? Yeah, I can. So in theory we could get, like, say this Tanto here, we could give it one Wake size 1 and a Act size 1. It might fire off that Act size 1, cause the enemy to juke, and then could follow up with that Wake size 1 to try and chase him down.
Especially I remember in earlier carrier testing, before we had a lot of the tech and the toys we do now, one of the first tactics that really emerged was taking an Act S1 and making it like 4 or 5 kilometer range, which let you fire it at the enemy earlier, then force them to evade, at which point you could like get in closer and win with your guns or your Wake S1s, and that pretty much still holds up today, though there are more options available, of course.
Got a lot of different tools and toys at play here, but you do have that choice of, say, Act size 1, like you mentioned, 4 kilometers, which is your radar range. Just fire this off. As
these have 5. Craft will give missiles they fire at other craft, I believe. They'll only fire at like 75% of their max fuel range. So you might want a bit more.
Said that yesterday. It was like 75% of their max fuel range, and the bombers will drop at like 90 or 95%.
95 for anti-ship.
All right, there you go. So these little riposte block 5s here, these are keyed up to be, those are the AMMs. These riposte block 4s, these are keyed up to 5 kilometers. So 5 times 0.75, don't do math on stream, kids, but that's like a little less than 4 kilometers, right?
Probably,
like
yeah.
3,750, I want to say. So you can do a little bit of tech there. Just you might see a design of these Barracudas. I think it's the dogfight setting. Yeah, you can see that they've got their basic little axe guys here. So, fun little techs. Again, you can experiment with yourself. You have the baseline carriers that you can then take all of these missiles from and then make your own little tweaks and tunings. Nebulous is a game about finding how you kind of want to tailor your fleet to what engagements and then what tools and tricks and toys you want to bring to the battlefield. But anyways, that's us covering size 1s. Let's move on to some of the new things here, because we just covered the size 1 missile. Let's go into the size 1 sort of reverse hybrid, the SDM Lunge.
Yeah, the SDM-1 was added as basically a premium craft-only munition. which means you cannot put these in VLS, you cannot put these in arm launchers, you can only fire these from craft.
I believe there's also
And-
restrictions on where you can mount them on craft. I think it's the Tantos can't take them in the internal bay, right?
Correct, they also do not fit in the internal base, they can only fit on external hardpoints because they are too long.
Specifically tailored against that. I remembered, I think it was Vren mentioned there was a build for like a very expensive missile. You go with this 9-point command, and then you take a lunge here, and I believe it has, it's got that 0.31 armor penetration, so that's enough to pierce any craft. I believe craft in general have 0.3 centimeter armor?
All craft except the pike have 0.3 centimeters, the pike has 0.1.
Alright. As we see, this missile does 65 damage, so that is going to be, with the Blast-Frag warhead, just enough to one-shot both the Barracuda and the Tanto. Tanto having 50 integrity and the Barracuda having 60, so that is an expensive option you can do, but it is something that is possible with the size ones. I believe there's some other techs people have experimented with this, but this has been the one that's kind of popped out to me as the expensive, I want this thing to die.
Yeah, the 9-point command lunge is basically a way where you can just, like, more or less buy yourself out of any problem in the ASF fight. If you bring enough of them, because these are more or less a guaranteed kill on any craft that you launch them at, because craft will not automatically try to defend themselves against these as they're size 1s. They only craft only automatically defend against size 2 and above with guns and their own missiles. And the EL warhead means you have a basically guaranteed chance to actually do damage no matter what angle you impact from.
They're saying except for skiffs. I think it was the pike that was the exception for the armor, right?
Yes, the pike only has 0.1.
You can see integrity.
The skiff is the halberd.
Yeah, in the halberd class skiff, you can see that skin thickness of 0.3 there. Yeah, lunges, hitting your opponent around the head with a gold brick wrapped in a slice of lemon. That sounds like a pretty good description. Yeah, you're paying the price for it, but for 9 points, and I believe you can carry a couple of these if you wanted to on like strike craft. So very much expensive. And if you lose that craft, you're going to be paying through the nose for it, but you can buy yourself the victory, like Mathblob said. So, I think there was a couple
both
other
STMs.
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Both STMs consist of a boost stage, which is very fast. As you can see, the maximum this can go is 850 meters a second. This lets it get out. This lets it get out to the enemy quicker, and then the second stage, also called the main stage, is more slower. It's a reasonable speed for a missile, and much more maneuverable, and this lets you actually go ahead and turn in and intercept the craft.
Yeah, so you've
for
got
the
your
lunge,
reverse
actually,
hybrid there.
funnily enough, it is literally just an S1 with the EL warhead on the front.
Look at that. And you can do the little monkey. Yeah. So, that's covering the size 1 and the size 1 lunge. Now, because you only have the size 1 like single seeker type, you're probably going to get something like command. I noticed you can't put EO in these, but I think that's because I'm on OSP side.
That's on OSP. You can put EO on lunges on ANS, but they're like, I don't even know. It's like 12
8
points or something.
Plus
It's
the missile itself, so don't
it
do that.
is
But
exorbitantly expensive, and command is probably
better
just
in
about
general.
as good, as long as you have something providing offset track, or you just don't get evade locked first.
Yep. So, you could do other options, of course. Like if you want to, you could try going for a cheaper seeker like Wake, or going for that home on jam, like we mentioned
I
earlier.
wouldn't put Wake on a lunge because craft will wait until rear aspect to fire.
Okay.
Which means you can't use these as opener missiles in an engagement, which is really also the main advantage that you get out of the lunge, which is that you get a couple extra kilometers over the S1 and over guns, of course. And so that, for example, if you want to fight a bigger force that isn't using expensive missiles, like only S1s, you can engage them first and force them to evade first and inflict some casualties first, before then going in and having hopefully a more advantageous fight because of those missiles that you brought.
So I'd say the lunge, very much in the fencing terminology that seems to be coming up, does kind of suit the nature where you're trying to go for this very like aggressive kind of opening poke, jab towards the enemy, cause them to quickly kind of take the back foot, step back, and that. I would even go so far as to call this a lance. The idea, you maybe bring this along, like let's say you're charging on horseback, use your lance, maybe your lance breaks, and then it's like, all right, well, let's go out with swords and whatever's into the general thick of it.
I don't think SCM1s, your range is going to be pretty tight. if you want to use these in kind of a like hit and run style fashion.
I was just thinking you bring one of these on like a Barracuda or something as your opening salvo and then get into the dogfight proper.
Yeah, that is what you generally use the lunges for. They don't have quite the range if you'd want to actually like run away after firing that missile, in case it's like a much larger force.
Alright. I think that's a pretty good coverage of the SDM-1 then. Let's take a look at size 2s. We'll just go down the list in order here. There's a size 2 that we had kind of talked about before with Vren. It was called the Breadstick, I believe was the working term. Bomber deterrent, as it's referred to in, that would be Kyanite. So tell me a little bit about this one. What is this thing's role in the general combat?
If you look at all of the common missiles that are used to attack craft, which is the S1, SDM1, S2, and SDM2, there are some other bodies that are used sometimes, but those are for much more niche applications. The only one that has enough damage to one-shot a bomber is a max warhead S2, which is you need 135 damage to do that.
On the damage here, we got 0.44 centimeter pen, so that's 44 mils. You get 139 on this. Going into our spacecraft designer, I'll have to add a new ship here, but we can see these Sturgeon bombers down here, 135 integrity, 0.3 armor. The Halberd skiff as well has 130 integrity and that 0.3 skin. So you can see that both of these kind of heavier craft. I believe it's also the Alliance's, I forget the name of their little...
The CWAC, the Sundial, also has 135.
Yeah, so this is a specific device tailored to knocking out those heavier craft, because, again, lighter, more maneuverable craft could probably jinx something like this.
They are actually surprisingly effective against fighters. The thing that really holds them back against fighters is that fighters will be much more adept at shooting them down with their nose guns, which they are going to do against S2s.
All right. So something to keep in mind. This is kind of your anti-heavy asset device. So you can bring these along on various ships. Like, let's see these Barracudas. If I wanted to, I think on one of these, I could equip it on the wing, or on the belly slot, so I'd have to take off jammers and stuff. Why doesn't this fit? Oh, because I got perch rockets. There we go. So yeah, you could say, if you want to go bomber hunting, equip a pair of S2s on one of your Barracudas, or I believe it can fit in the center bay on the Tanto if you equip the S2 launcher there.
It can, however, generally, the bombers are completely defenseless. So if you do have fighters up, and if you want to go bomber hunting, then all you really need is your nose gun. And that will be more than enough to kill them very quickly. If the enemy is escorting their bombers, the threat you need to deal with is those escorts, and so you'll want to mostly only use anti-fighter weapons on your craft.
Yeah. So you want to trim the escort and then just nose gun down the bombers.
Yes, exactly.
All right. So for the hypothetical of that, like, I noticed sometimes it's very annoying seeing that, CWAX plane or the Halberd skiffs kind of floating off in the distance. Would you be able to hit those from afar with this? Because I'm noticing the triangle.
The range on the max warhead S2 is pretty limited, and especially if the craft decides to run away, it will be able to outrun it unless it's very, very close already.
Okay.
For anti-sundial work, the SDM2 is generally used because it is more than a good trade to fire two 5 to 7 point SDM2s at a 75 to 100 point CWAC. And the CWAC is also can't defend itself, and it's not particularly evasive, so 2 or 3 are pretty much going to guarantee kill. Against skiffs, especially on OSP, they are extremely good at defending themselves, and the only thing pretty much that will get through their nose gun, if loaded with flechette, are torps, because they just have so much HP that a single skiff can't shoot them down in time.
I believe the flechette has only
S2Hs,
0.1 centimeter armor pen, and the torps have 0.25, so they'll be doing half damage and just struggling to
half damage as well. If I found in testing, if you max out the agility on S2s, they can also pen it in volume, but then again, you're running into extremely severe range issues.
Yeah. Everything checks and balances, as again with the missile triangle, anytime you pay for one aspect, you're giving up on other ones.
And the main way to deal with skiffs from range, at least for ANS, is to just throw an S2H at them, if we've...
Another option there. And I believe that they changed HEI so it's more consistent against small targets. but you generally wanted to use Blast-Frag for that, right?
The change was that instead of only putting 1 ray's worth of damage into craft, as it was before, HEI warheads now deposit all of their damage into a craft. So basically, any HEI missile you have, if it can directly impact the craft, it will just one-shot it.
Okay.
There's also no rolls to deal with on Blast-Frag.
Dice roll, yeah, okay.
However, the thing with HEI is that a bit after, all Seekers are changed to have like a couple meters of positional error, which means trying to hit any craft with an HEI missile is just not reliable.
Yeah, it's going to be essentially like, hey, maybe I'll hit you, but with the innate inaccuracy and the fact that you have to hit that thing bang on, you're really gambling for that.
Yeah, it's I have not seen it be worth it.
So, in terms of that, though, we had covered, we had covered the S2, just kind of the little tech there of the Breadstick, kind of just a nice device to have on your sort of heavier ships. Get those one-arm bandits, able to throw those against bombers. And we had the SBM2 here. We were discussing some of the various effects you could do with that. I believe you had a tech in one of these fleets, if you wanted to talk about that little Mathblob device. Try and figure out which fleet it's in.
Yes, it is in, I believe, most of the starters. The
one of these.
I don't think Maple uses it, but I think all of the other starters do indeed use the tuning that I came up with.
The 5-pointer, I think it was, right?
Yes, 5-point SDM, max warhead, act wake.
So, see, this is by what we mean by max warhead. You just take this little orange slider here, you set it to 2 engine, 5 Blast-Frag on that. Gives you a nice big boom in this thing. But more importantly, I believe it's the engine triangle changes, right?
Partially. If you'll notice, if you only have 4 warhead pips, the armor penetration is enough to get through craft. So you don't actually need a warhead this large to get through craft armor and get to do full damage, which lets you, if you land the roll, you will one-shot a fighter.
And a little long-range device there to smack people with. We saw the escorts on Maple were equipped with these, and they would kind of tend to salvo them out against any fighter that got within range. But the max warhead is taken for a reason, and why is that?
That's because if you look at the boost stage, it goes at max 850 meters a second. That means you are able to approach the target very quickly, and you only need the extra agility from the second stage really in the final approach, which means that actually if you're stage closer in, that is better for you for your chances to hit the craft.
So
it also means you'll be flying very quickly through a good chunk of the PD fire the craft will be putting out, which does help their penetration a bit against 20mm and such.
So in essence, you're using the speed you would see from a classic conventional stage hybrid. We've seen how size 2 and 3 hybrids can get through things like Pavis and Defenders and such. And then you're using that speed to get real close. The nose guns can't get you. And then you kick into high maneuverability mode at only 450 meters from target here.
Yeah, and the being able to stage in so close also means you don't really need to invest into burn time on your main stage engine, because say if you increase the warhead by so if you decrease the warhead to the one you need to pen craft, you'd stage it 1,000 kilometers out. Others would stage it up to 1.5 generally, and that means a lot of that fuel on your main stage is going into just getting close to the target in the first place. But after that, because SDMs generally don't have the performance to hit an evading fighter on the first try, you might want to come back around for a second try. But that means you're burning extra fuel, you need extra time to do that, to turn to close back in on the fighter again. And if your boost stage is doing most of the work of getting close, you don't actually need to increase the burn time on the main stage, which would let you, and you'll still get enough passes from just the minimum burn time. available.
Trying to
basically.
really min that out. So we can see messing this triangle. This is pretty much like the smallest you get. Technically, you could push it all the way down to the bottom right corner for 340 meter maneuverability, but I think that's a little narrow for like turn time, right?
No, the reason, I mean, it would probably have enough burn time if you put it all the way to the maximum maneuverability.
All right.
But unlike missiles, which are going to be actively approaching your ship, which means that AMMs, all they have to do is they have to get between the missile and your ship. The missile does most of the work of closing the distance.
Okay.
Generally. A evading craft will actively try to get away from the missile, which means the anti-craft missile has to do the work of closing in on it. And that means if you're not fast enough, you'll take too long to close that distance, because fighters are like around 130 meters a second. So with 180 meters a second, you're only closing about like 50, maybe up to 80 meters a second.
See, that's 150 mil speed there compared to like I wonder if I can see the top speed on these. Cruise, hard burn. Yeah, Barracudas can hard burn up to like 114. So you might be going a little bit faster, but it's going to take some time to approach that. So
yeah, and
so that's why you'd want to go for a little bit of top speed, like 180, because otherwise you might run out of fuel in that time there, because you're just taking too long to catch up to them.
And yeah, generally for anti-craft missiles, unlike AMMs, you really have a incentive, more or less, to have burn time, to have top speed, to have maneuverability, because burn time lets you chase for longer, top speed means you can close better, and also, which increases your effective burn time because you're spending less time chasing the craft down.
You'll hit them sooner, so you don't need as much fuel.
Yeah, in this case, you don't need as much fuel, because the boost stage is doing most of the work. On non-min stage STM designs, you will need to bring a bit of extra burn time.
I believe that
and then maneuverability, of course, is because your missile needs to turn around to be able to hit the fighter.
So the ones I'd seen was, there's two examples here. So the min stage one is this 5-pointer, where you're going for a 2-5 tick there, and then whatever you get, you can pull this out of Amethyst yourself. But the other one was the Tornado. That was the 3-4 ratio that costs exactly 4 points with a fixed seeker there and the Wake secondary. And then that one's just the fully bottomed out to the bottom right with max maneuverability, but because it's got that extra engine time, it's able to kind of just keep in pursuit for longer, right?
Let me check. Where are you? Maple?
Maple had the Tornadoes, and I think it was the Whirlwinds I'd fished out of Amethyst, so...
Yes, the Whirlwind is the min stage.
All right, so goes to show your 4-pointer and 5-pointer types. These are two common missiles that are included in the starter fleet, so anyone has access to these. You just need to copy them into your saved missiles parameter here. You can make that template and then tune it to your heart's desire. All right. I think that covers the 4 immediate types of anti-craft missiles, so then you kind of mix and match these depending on what you want. So we want to talk like some common loadouts. I know we kind of teased it a little bit with the conversation about the Barracuda and like some things you can include there, like the lunges. So
for Barracudas, at least, very strong design is not particularly missile heavy. Actually, if I'll just
believe that Bren mentioned
quick.
The other day, one very common grouping is just fuel pods, jamming pods, the flechette cannons for anti-light craft, and then you've just got the nose gun there as well. So you've got this general package with just like 2 mounts to include some size ones if you just wanted to have those in case the enemy needs to be making, what am I trying to say? Trying to force the enemy to evade. That's where I'm trying to go with that.
Yeah, the jamming pods make you much more resistant to ACT missiles. They're a very good defensive tool, and they are free. The 20mm nose gun is chosen just because any other gun would
cost money,
increase the cost of your craft, and that is a lot of money to be spending, especially if you can just get the flechette for free with gun pods. Fuel tanks are included because at base, fighter endurance is very limited, and you'll basically always want your fuel, and then you've got 2 S1s to do more or less whatever you want with. You can
bring
S1s in there. You maybe even bring lunges on there.
Let's
Which
do
is-
a little showcase of like some designs we could do. Like let's get one of those command lunges we had as an example, right? Just load this thing up real quick. Just do this. I know, probably that's about right. That looks like a 9-pointer. So let's say on this, I want to make a new loadout. So we'll call this, I don't know, Nekoboy's Craft. We'll just name it that. So then I'll want to get my fuel tanks. I want to get my jamming pods and that. And I'll want to get my... Oop, that's the wrong slot for those. So I'll have to do fuel tanks there. And then I'll get my gun pods as well. Looks pretty common. Then one wing, I'll put, like, say, a lunge so I can open up and battle with that. And then maybe the other one, I just want that cheap little act missile size 1 because it's already kind of expensive with those lunges. So that's like 10, 11 points worth of missiles. Yeah. So.
Yep.
Goes to show you can pay that premium, or you can decide 9 points per like ship added on with that lunge. That's too much. You just go with your cheaper size 1s with that. Maybe you want to mix it up again. Like let's say one of these repos here. I'll just duplicate this over. Called the add that ARAD seeker because that there we go, Hodge. Yeah, that's probably fine. Let's call this a Haji, so you could equip, say, your Barracuda with that as another option there. So much cheaper loadout than paying for that lunge for kind of winning your joust. So it's really kind of decision on how you want to do things. Ah, we got Ren tuning in here. Nice to see him. We had Vastal in here earlier too. Ah, fun. And that's a little bit of a showcase on like some of the armaments you can do for that one. We want to talk some things about bombers, because I believe the bombers could get potentially some warheads to use against like lighter craft, because you could see potentially them taking these SDM loadouts and just not running any torps. Has there been much use against that, having bombers kind of like a size 2 platform for hunting craft?
It's, especially on the Sturgeon, it's a choice you can make. Natasha has had some decent success running these with 100mm gun pods and then STMs on the wings.
You could potentially
It's kind of
load
like
up
an anti-light and
grape or HE rounds?
high explosive generally.
Alright.
You'll be able to close in to light chips so that high explosive won't miss. Grape is really just there to stop them from dodging. AP is overkill, at least for light stuff, though if you want to mass a bunch of bombers and then subsystem target something heavier, then you
Going
might want
after
to have
a
AP.
Voxel's thrusters or something to really make it slow down?
If the gun pods are very accurate, I think, especially with the armor nerf, you can probably get away with HE there, but like a heavy cruiser or something, you'll definitely need to.
Yeah, that 40
run
centimeter
AP.
armor on the Axford would be a little bit much.
And you also, with gun pods especially, you don't need to be able to pen on the first hit. Craft are very accurate, especially if you subsystem target, so they can drill through the armor eventually.
Working down those armor plates to the point where you manage to get through the facing, even if it's got a little bit of angling. So maybe because I think it's like, what, 100 mil is, with HE rounds, 30 centimeters per pen?
I believe so, yeah.
So if you have the Vauxhall, I think it's got like 26 centimeter armor, even like angled slightly, maybe it ends up being like 31 centimeters. You bang that plate a couple times, it's going to drop down to 30, and then you'll start getting into the goods inside. So yeah, some potentials there. I'm going to load up the ANS side real quick so we can look at Maple here. So they're a little different with the fighters, because the fighters, the Tanto has to choose whether it has the size 1 or size 2 bay. So you can see in the starter fleets, this one, the Katana, has a Void Superiority fighter loadout, which comes with one of those SDM size 2s, right?
Yep, it's got one of the tornadoes on there.
So it's worth noting with this loadout, you do have your fuel tanks external, and you do have your 20mm nose gun, and you've got your kind of... Would you say this would be used like on the Joust, or would this kind of be used in pursuit for the SDM2?
The STM2, one of its main advantage for craft is that it has a very long range. So if you see
Take a look at it here
if
now.
you see an enemy flight that is likely going to, even after some attrition, to be about as strong or even stronger than you, what you can very much do is you can drop your missiles, get some hits, and then just run away.
Right.
And the SDM2, it has like 8K range on the
Just shy
boost
of
stage,
it,
and that lets you very much engage at a very long range where the enemy isn't really going to be able to close in on you.
So comparing especially the range, like let's compare our size 1s here. These things only have about 2 kilometers of fuel time. These longer range SDM2s they can very much dump that shot at like 8 kilometers or so range. So let's say you've got, I don't know, common situation, you'd have a skiff or a, I forget the name of it, the Hourglass, I think it was? Sundial? Sundial, right. Called Hourglass in the little fleet selection here, but that's because they renamed it. You can do that as well. If anyone doesn't know, you just click on this button. You can change your names, change your designation, help yourself out there. Anyways, back to the point. So you could, say, have one of those along with your flight, providing that radar range, and then you do some long-range intercept with these, thin out the enemy's numbers, and then you can decide if you want to take that fight or not with the follow-up engagement. So gives you a little bit more flexibility.
Yeah, a very big part of at least the air superiority complement of this fleet is actually not even the fighters. It's these 2 frigates that come along with the carrier, which have a VLS full of SDMs.
Yeah.
Which, if fighters can get into range, you can dump a bunch of those at them, and it's pretty scary for the enemy because they have quite the long range, and if you do have a VLS, you can decide to fire a lot of missiles, which makes craft self-defense a fair bit less effective because, of course, the more missiles you have, the better you're going to be at getting through PD.
Just going to be that odd of one of them deciding, hey, I'm going to hit you, and there's only so many missiles they can shoot down. So these little frigates here, we see they've got their missiles, the Tornadoes, key to defensive. They're targeting craft of size 2 and 3. I believe size 3 is going to be like the heavy craft, the Sundial, the Sturgeon, the bomber who is named the Claymore, so that's going to be those. But then size 2 threats, that would be things like the fighters, correct? Like the Barracuda and Tanto?
The skiff and the pike count as size 1 for the PD controller. Both fighters count as size 2, and both bombers as well as the CWAC count as size 3.
So, shows the multi-role purposes of these missiles. Either they can be equipped on fighter craft and you can kind of do some skirmishing, or you can project that sort of 8-kilometer no-go zone that the Clear Skies and Starlit Skies frigates here are providing just by having that VLS-2 bank. So, nasty little wake-up if anyone walks into range of those.
Yeah, especially on ANS, your air superiority is a lot more tied to ships because the Tanto is more limited in the missiles that it can bring, but also its performance in a dogfight is going to be worse than the Barracuda because the Barracuda gets flechette, which is very strong, and the Barracuda also gets to be faster and turn faster, which means that if you get into a gunfight, unless you've already stacked the odds against you, or are bringing some extra weight missiles, generally the Barracuda is going to win, unless you have a severe numbers advantage. ANS can get pretty good at dogfighting by mixing 20mm and coilgun nose guns, but even then, you're generally still going to need a bit of a numerical or a missile advantage. But to make up for this, the ANS can just decide to put a bunch of SDMs on one of their ships, and they also have more ready access to stuff like Sarissas and Auroras, which can also allow your ships to better help out your craft, or even engage craft on their own.
The Sarissa Frig being a tool to happily cut down wings of fighters, and I ran into a Sarissa Vauxhall yesterday, which was doing a very good job at thinning the herd.
Sarissas are very lethal when they hit. They only do half damage to fighters, as their armor penetration was slightly reduced, same as the Aurora.
Take a look at Sandshot here.
They also get the 3-round burst. So if two of those 3 hit you, then your fighter is going to be very quickly removed. It's not like RPF where it'll slowly,
whittle away the health
HP.
bar. It's just going to 2-tap you effectively.
Yeah. And there's not much time to react there before you lose a craft. So if you do know there's Sarissas in an area, it's keep your fighters on juke. If you're getting a bit closer to Sarissas, you may need to set evade as well. And even then, if you can get lucky hits off, of course, but if you get very close, the Sarissa will also start being able to hit you even on evade.
So it goes to show, again, that Neb is a game of asymmetrical warfare. Both sides have their own sort of appealing factors. OSP side, you can take the 3,000-point carrier from Amethyst Squadron. You can run a whole bunch of Barracudas and try and go for that more dogfight-heavy style. ANS, you can play a bit more focused towards your, I wouldn't say like capital ships exclusively, but a bit more towards your like actual vessels here with the VLS2s. projecting a bunch of missiles from those and trying to then use your ships, say, a smaller flight of fighters escorting or trying to bait them into range. So you could say thin out the enemy fighter wing of Barracudas, and then your Tantos, after these things like, say, the Sarissas or these BLS-2 Tornadoes have kind of taken a bit that, then you can just commit to that fight and potentially win. Or you can pick away using the nose guns, like you said, the coil gun being very good for the 10 shots that it has.
Coil gun is very good at killing craft. However, the main drawback is that it has very limited ammo, and thus the craft will be very conservative when they fire.
Mhm.
This again ties back into the evasion mechanics for fighters, which will, try and, evade if they are shot at by guns. And because the coil gun only fires very rarely, at least compared to, say, the 20mm, which will just consistently...
Let me pull the fire rates, yeah. Yeah, 900 rounds per minute there with that thing on the 20mm compared to, like, the coil gun's recycle time of 1 second. So, yeah, pretty significant difference there. Fire rate 60
Also, the
900.
coil gun will wait until it's basically guaranteed to hit, whereas the 20mm, if the fighter's going for a gun run, it's just going to keep spewing bullets. Which
Sometimes
means that...
accuracy by volume, right?
Not exactly accuracy by volume, although that can of course work. The main thing the 20mm fighters do in that kind of mix is that they basically force the enemy craft to go evasive, at which point they're not, targeting your own fighters, and then the coil guns come in and basically just execute them.
Alright, so you can get your kind of mixed wings there. Like, let's say you had one flight, just kind of going for... just reload this fleet so I've not got any edits in it, but... where's Maple? There we go. Take a look at these. You would see the Void Superiority style. These have their... where is it? Oh, there we go. Yep. So they've got their SDM2, so they can open up in a fight with that and have that 20mm nose gun going off. You could potentially have a second flight then of Tantos with, say, the 15mm coil gun here. I'll just make a new loadout for that. That could be potentially coming in further behind them, so you have a sort of secondary, longer-range intercept wing that then commits to the fight a little bit afterwards. The enemies kind of started their furball up, and then these guys just come in and secure those kills.
More or less, you'll want the 20mm nose guns actually dogfighting as well, because that's when they'll use their guns to try and get enemies
Just
to
saying
evade.
they get the 20mm on the joust and then commit to the initial, and then you commit your 15mm coil guns once they've set them up.
Yeah, it's generally going to be lower micro if you just merge the two flights, because the coil guns are also extremely good at shooting down missiles. They're great, for example, for ship PD, and for shooting down SDM2s, they are unmatched. If you have a flight of coil Tantos, and the enemy launches any reasonable number of SDMs at you, the coils are just going to shoot them all down.
So you get your mixed complement here, and then you just commit those together in the fight, and on that joust, enemy casts say, whoa, SDM2 be upon you, and then that coil gun says, I cast no, and then you start meeting for your initial combat.
Pretty much. They are quite expensive, but to make up for that, the coil gun is extremely good.
Chat's mentioning ANS being a bit mount-starved, needing Aurora's Sarissa to handle crafting munitions. Well, see, there's the other thing, which is going to be the advent of adding more escorts to your fleet. So I know before ANS very much liked going super heavy on the capitals, and escorts were something that was occasionally done, but not quite seen as much. Now we're seeing a bit more people deciding to take these smaller escort craft because they are quite good at their job of just seeing off fighters. So if you're wanting to, say, run, say, like a battleship, you might need to bring along an escort frigate along with it to make sure it doesn't get bombing runned. Or if you're trying to do something like dual Axford, you're going to have to make sure you partnered up with your carrier player well enough to get air coverage or have other escort assets be around nearby.
Well, battleships generally, especially because they will have a fair amount of free point space in those 3K, because the good battleship is like 2.4K unless you're putting missiles on it.
2.2 to 2.4, yeah, around that range.
Yeah. And so these also just don't have great hard kill. You've got those 4 C2 mounts that are recessed with really bad arcs. Battleships generally, you're probably going to want to bring at least a PD escort or 2 along with them, just so you can have enough hard kill, and because of the R3 rockets and such, you also can't rely on soft kill as much as you could before.
Yeah. So with that, you might see.
Axfords.
Let's see. So we could get, like, say, our little escort ship here. You could very easily fit a spyglass or something on. Nice little frigate to have. And then your battleship gets keyed up. And like you said, the recessed cheeks, you do the usual thing where you'd put on, like, say, the backup antenna, because we know how much the battleship antenna loves getting hit. Get that thing. You might get, say, your, I don't know, chaff launcher. You can get a VLS-2 on this thing, run killjoys and the new decoys, and probably a comms jammer as well. Usually sits in here. There we are. So nice little loadout that you can get on the battleship, and then your choice of the usual guns. Then on these side cheek mounts, you could potentially put Auroras if you want, or on these nose ones, maybe you decide you want to invest in like a Sarissa. Your choice. Most likely going to be Defenders, because Defenders are still very nice.
Defenders are still very good, but Flak and also Auroras have a lot more stuff that they're good against. With Thermval, you'll also probably be seeing more Cruise S2s around, because they are harder to soft kill now, especially if you're a big ship.
Got to be careful about that signature size.
Yeah. You'll have to be careful about not using your main engines too much if there might be missiles unbound. But yeah, Flak's good, Auroras are good, Defenders are good. There's reasons to take all three, and that's probably a very good thing.
Yeah. And then your Sarissa, again, is that option of paying a bit of a premium, but if you were to, say, put on your escort craft, that's a nice way of seeing off things out to about, I think 6 kilometers or so they can go to.
The Sarissa has 8 kilometers of max range, but as it is against missiles, it's not really a tool to kill craft necessarily. The main advantage that it brings is that it will force them to be more evasive at long ranges, which makes them slower, which makes them, if they don't evade, it punishes them for that very quickly, and of course the Sarissa still can get lucky shots off. But if craft try to close, of course on closer ranges, the Sarissa will be able to pick them up more, but of course it doesn't have that large of a fire rate, so if you are trying to defend versus craft that are like actively trying to close on you, other options will generally be better. The Sarissa is still great value, especially if you put it on like a spyglass frigate, for example. You've got a lot of area where the enemy carrier player is just going to be very annoyed if they want to get through there.
Much as we saw before, where sometimes during like container liners, we would see a Sarissa brick brought, and that would just generate a very annoying zone you had to carefully path towards. And then you would see, okay, well, there's a Sarissa brick over here. I guess I just don't missile strike that. Similar story with the way that the carrier player is going to have to think, right?
Yeah, pretty much. You'll be suppressed, and there's definitely more risk being in that area, but don't expect the Sarissa to necessarily generate like an 8-kilometer no-fly zone and kill every craft that it sees.
It's going to be a suppression device, I think you said. Yeah, that's the best way. So, yeah, you can mix and match your stuff. One question from chat here was, do squadron formations seem to matter? I know the squadrons, you can kind of choose your stuff there, homeworld style, whether you've got like a line or a plus shape. Do you notice any big differences there on that?
I haven't seen them matter much.
All right.
Also in testing as well, but the main thing that they really matter for is if you're gonna be striking ships.
Okay.
Because depending on how you set up your formations, your missiles are going to be fired from slightly different points. So for example, a cross formation is going to have a lot more craft at the same distance from the target, which lets you get more concentrated salvo. So exactly for torpedoes, that's pretty good, because you'll have more or less all your torpedoes come into that come into the very close zone where 20mm will be able to hit them. But of course, if all of them are coming at once, the 20mm doesn't have that much time to shoot them down, and so you might get some more hits.
All right, so a bit more factoring to bombing than into anything else, really.
Yeah, like more or less. The formations aren't very far apart, so it doesn't matter a ton. But some people do swear by certain formations. For specific setups. And for example, if you were
right now with its 2 defenders, I'd be approaching this with, say, a wing of bombers heading on that. Potentially, it could be better to, say, go in a line formation, because then I disperse my bombs kind of across the length here, versus like a cross formation might be a little bit more center focused. So it depends what you kind of want to do there. It can play a little bit of difference.
No, bombs actually similar to like missiles and other weapons, they will pick a random aim points on the ship to go for.
All right.
So your formation doesn't really matter for those, and of course bombs generally have very bad PD pen, so there isn't too much to be done there. I might want to note that, for example, if you are going to be using S2s on your craft, which is an option for bombers, it's also pretty good for light strike against small ships. But generally on bombers, they're a very niche option because on ANS, they'll lock you out of torpedoes, which are very effective for their cost as well because they're just short-range missiles and they're balanced around that.
Cut you off for a quick sec just to showcase that. So as you can see here on this is the Claymore bomber, you can choose between your size 2 bay, which means that you could either take the bombs like you see here. Hang on, must not be the light. Oh, that's all right, loaded. Okay. Yeah, you can take your choice of munitions here. So you can go with some of these bombs or some SDMs if you want to do that. Also can fit some size 2s. Versus the torpedo bay, that means you get things like cluster bombs. You can also use the 22 bomb in there, or you can use your torpedoes, as would kind of be indicated by torpedo bomber loadout. So, anyways, continue.
But yes, for S2s, which you can put on bombers, they are niche because they are less individually damaging. They are generally more susceptible to BG if the enemy is bringing sufficient flak. But their main advantage is that you can fire them from a much longer range, which means your bombers are going to be in much, much less danger. So that is something to think about on Sturgeons as well. If you want just to throw just a bunch of stuff at the enemy, you can do both Torps and S2s.
So say we get a mixed flight, like I'm just going to load up here, classic Hurricane missile loaded in this thing. You could get 4 of those things. You might pair that up with another bomber that say has torpedoes, so you can mix in your salvos there depending how you equip your flights.
Generally, it's a Sturgeon-only thing because on ANS you can only have one bomber do either S2s or S3s, and so you're generally gonna want to like specialize more.
Fair enough.
On OSP, you can get some. You can just load some extra S2s on there to get some extra damage along your torps, though it is pretty expensive.
Yeah.
For craft launched. For craft launched S2s as well, generally, you just don't need to care about range at all, because even like max warhead S2 going very fast, unless you spec into a ton of maneuverability, it doesn't take much to reach like 8 or 9k range, which is very, very far.
So you can do some long range fragging potentially there. So let's look at a super expensive Surgeon here with like 4 S2s and then 2 torpedoes as well.
Yeah.
Again, this is overkill as hell, but
it's overkill. I remember Misk running a Journeyman with a couple of these loadouts. Then that would just have like 2 or 3 bombers, maybe even 4, just like hanging around.
Ooh, hang on. A little bit of a latency there. Can you repeat that last one? Run that by me again. Mathblob, you still with me? I think we're getting some DC thing, but. Alright, so we're getting a little staticky here. Tell you what, chat. We're going to go on a 3-minute ad break here and then hope Mathblob gets back. So we'll take a moment here. Yeah. Definitely we'll set that. Alright, chat, we're going to do a 3-minute intermission. So we'll be right back. Just to let Mathblob connection stabilize. So yeah, we'll run ads in the meantime and then resume our nebulous nonsense, kind of talking about things. Alright, I'll see you in 3 minutes, chat. Meow meow. Okay, Evignon, we are back. I recovered Mathblob from the Scrunkle zone. We're not quite sure what happened, but it seems to be fixed now. So, anyways, do you remember what we were talking about?
I believe we're talking about S2s on
the S2 bomber potential for Sturgeons and such.
Generally, they're pretty rare, but they are doable. You will be spending a lot on your munitions, and you are going to have to watch out for flak. But the extra range is quite nice, and if you're, for example, only striking lighter targets, S2s might actually have more PD pen, because cappers and such generally will prefer 20mm and can't really mount enough flak to kill S2s.
To think about then would be, if we were to say, compare the, say, size 2 payload, this is the same as an MLS-2 on a multi-mission tug, which is a nice little device for intercepting lighter assets in the various capper spheres. So potentially you could use this to deliver the same weapons payload as that MMT.
Yeah, though generally, people will also put their fighters into anti-light work. Though against like heavier targets there, you might also want some bombers. For example, on OSP, a great option for the Barracuda is the R1, but that doesn't have enough armor penetration to get through a DD, so you might want to put some S2s on your Barracudas, or put some on bombers, or put tarps on bombers to deal with those more effectively.
Yeah, depending on what kind of threat, because the rockets here, I'm seeing these are mutually exclusive with jamming pod and such, so if I wanted S2s in my Barracudas...
You can bring jammers and rockets.
Can you? You can bring jammers and rockets. You can't bring size 2s in the other stuff, though.
Yes.
So, there we are. So it goes to show some options, and potentially, like, if we wanted to, say, do something fancy, we could have our torpedo-equipped bomber. Maybe we want to give it, like, one of these SDM whirlwinds, help it out a little bit when maybe it's grouped up with fighters trying to go for an attack run.
Yeah, you can use them as missile trucks for your fighters, so those can focus more on dogfighting. It's especially good on OSP because, for one, your Sturgeon doesn't have to give up the capability to bring torps. If you also bring S2s, and of course OSP does have an advantage in the dogfight, so it is more of a return, basically, if you decide on speccing into that, basically.
One question we got here is, does the offensive-defensive setting make a difference for missiles on craft?
Craft will actually decide what they will fire at based on the warhead that is on the missile. So anything with HEI or HEC-P will be fired at ships and will be automatically deauthorized when engaging craft, and vice versa for frag warheads. This does mean that, for example, a fighter's self-defense behavior might shoot STM-2s at incoming missiles, which does get kind of goofy, but you can always manually deauthorize that if that is a concern for you.
All right. But you don't have to worry about setting, like, detect small targets on the missile itself, and then setting
detect
anything
small
like
targets is always forced on when you are firing at a missile or craft. So that is not really an issue unless for some reason you want to make a cruise AMM or anti-craft missile, but I don't think I've seen anyone use those. So
not yet. Somebody's going to try it in the next little bit, though, for sure. All right. I think it's a good bit of question and answers there. If there's anything more, chat, please let us know, as well, we'd love to answer some questions about things. We covered the 4 main type of missiles you'll see on light craft versus craft warfare, and then the torpedoes. I think we talked a little bit about those yesterday with Vren. Those are just kind of generally well, it's a torpedo. It's not exactly rocket surgery here. It just kind of goes and whoppers into the larger ships. Anything else you want to really highlight there, Mathblob? Something from your guide or such? Because we do have that still sticky in the chat. Just kind of general doctrine or maybe executions for stuff.
Something I am going to... Right, yes. For ship-launched anti-craft missiles,
like
you're
the
going
SDM-2s or the breadsticks?
Like SDM-2s, breadsticks, stuff like that. Something you need to watch out for is, one, the NEZ, which stands for No Escape Zone, which basically means that at what range, if I fire this missile and the craft immediately turns around and runs away as fast as it can, at what range can it no longer run away far enough so that the missile will be out of range? If the craft is within the NEZ, then it can't, even if it tries to run away, it will still get hit. If it's outside, you kind of like dip in and then run away again, and
bait out those
the missile will run out of range and do nothing. This isn't too much of an issue on the SDM because it has a pretty high range and it's also very fast. So there's not much time for the fighters or craft to get away. It's much more of a issue on breadsticks, which aren't particularly fast. They don't have a great range. And by default, the PD controller will respect the NEZ. It's the last little toggle if you click on your PD missile settings in the
load up a testing range
settings.
Show that off. I know we'll just load up Birch or something here. Whatever. Oh, NRE already. Don't worry about that. Yeah, if we were to look at our PD controls, it would be under PD's, no.
PDMSL.
PDMSL, here we go. So yeah, that's the newest setting, craft NEZ, as we see at the bottom here. So this means that by default set to yes, you can turn that off, which means that this means you're potentially vulnerable to ships then dipping into your range, seducing one of those missiles, and then flying off. On the other hand, though, if you're really convinced that you need to fire those and they're going to commit to the run, then you can turn that off and they'll just fire this as soon as they can. So
Also note that if you manually PD prioritize target to launch an ACM fighter, for example, that will always fire regardless of the NEZ. So you might want to be.
So if you
might want to watch
Z
out a bit
mark
with
or something, you might just fire off. Yeah.
Also, for ship launched missiles, especially the slower ones, if you're, for example, using S2s or if you're using S2H, which are niche, but they are the only thing that can really reliably hit skiffs, you'll probably want a command seeker on them, just because.
Let's talk about that
just
briefly
because,
for a second here, because I can show that off then. Missile designer, I need to load up an ANS fleet to start with, but let's go good old Maple. So we'll make like that size 2 hybrid, this cyclone type you mentioned. So we go for like command guidance, and then we give that a Blast-Frag like so.
Yes, you'll want to max out the warhead because that actually lets it one-shot skiffs. That's why the skiff has 130 HP and not 135 like the bombers.
Oh, there you go. So
it lets it get to just the right break point where you can still one-shot it with an S2H.
Then just to make this thing go quick, we'll set the top speed, and then our missile triangle here doesn't have to be that long range because it is command guided, but if you wanted a hey skiff be gone device, then you've got one of these things. I think technically
there is some pretty specific things that you need to do with this because you can't get the stage far enough with a max warhead that it'll stage outside of flechette range. So if you don't give your cruise stage a fair bit of extra maneuverability and weave, the skiff might shoot it down before it even stages.
All right. So.
As well as for the sprint stage, you also need a bit more agility and weave, so that you also do not get shot down by flechette, because flechette is very strong, and you're essentially firing at, well, a point mass. That is the craft, which means you will have to get very, very close to that turret if you want to hit. Meaning the turret
and it's going to be like approaching a Pavise turret, and that
exactly, except stronger, because the flechette turret, even one of them, can sometimes shoot down mid-angle hybrids, which the Pavise generally cannot.
So if I wanted to say keep this thing, I might have to make a little bit of a changeover, maybe a bit more maneuverability to bump that weave up, and then just kind of see how that ends up
an S2H design is also described in the guide all the way at the end in the design showcase, and it gives all the relevant information, I believe. Yeah.
Yep, looks like it's right there.
Roughly.
I just had to flip over tabs. Yeah, it goes to show that's another little tool and toy. So if you're on Alliance side, then yep, you can end up seeing size 2 hybrids being used for anti-skiff duty. Although generally speaking, you're going to deal with the size 1, the SDM1, the size 2, and then the SDM2 as your kind of anti-craft munitions.
Anti-fighter.
Okay.
They're not great against bombers, so you can use them against them, but if you're specifically looking to kill bombers, then the Breadstick is probably the way to go, because S2 bombers, which would outrange this, are not particularly common. And to use torps, they'll have to get like within 4K, at which point, yeah, you can definitely use the Breadstick.
So if you got a torpedo bomber approaching, then again, you've got that size 2 device here. It's got a range of 7.3, almost 7.4 kilometers, and decent turn rate, so it can hit that bomber on approach, since most, actually I believe all bombers don't have nose guns, so they would need fighter screening.
Yeah. Bombers don't have nose guns. They are defenseless. The Breadstick actually generally doesn't get them on the first try around. What makes the Breadstick good is that with like the extra range the S2 has and like the speed and agility that you can still give it, it will generally like, as well as the Wake Seeker, even if it misses, it'll try and come around for a second pass. And if it misses, then it'll try and come around again and again and again, and eventually it's gonna hit.
And potentially could force your craft to evade on their approach, maybe messing them up?
Yes, unless they are on a
direct
attack order already, but at that point, you're going to surefire hit them.
Yeah.
Yes.
Noticing also the blast radius people mentioned before. 99-meter blast radius on this means potentially if you have a flight of bombers on approach there, one of these could splash against multiple, right?
If they happen to evade and get close to one another, yes. It can sometimes kill 2 bombers at once, sometimes 2 fighters. SDMs as well, if you get lucky, they might 2-splash them. But it's not super common, you can't really rely on it. At least
nice when it
with
happens.
the 99 meter blast radius, because I believe craft formation is about 120 meters, so you can't quite reach that, as well as it'll fuse at 50 meters from the craft, so that kind of reduces your effective like multi-kill radius.
Still a nice little option for when it does happen, but yeah, Breadstick.
Also
there,
for bombers specifically, for bombers as well, even if the Blast-Frag roll fails, the bomber will still take half the damage of the missile. Which means that stuff that needs multiple hits, like SDMs, are a bit more reliable against them, because of course hitting something twice in a row, the probabilities kind of work against you there.
You get much better odds there, yeah.
Yeah, but also with Breadsticks, like, they're gonna be generally a bit more effective, just because even if you don't get a nice roll, which is actually not super common, because these have a wake seeker, which means they'll generally be chasing behind the craft and coming at them from behind, which gets you a guaranteed hit chance. Yeah.
And I believe that with fighters, I know the Blast-Frag, its roll rate is 50-50 by default for head-ons. I think the EL is like 85 or so.
Correct.
But then I think there's a modifier for hitting strike craft that's like dependent on size, adds a little bonus. So it's like against bombers, I think it adds like a 40% bonus roll chance. So
correct.
Your Blast-Frags
Against
are
bombers, skiffs, and the sundial, which have like basically all missiles and all craft have a size stat. This is different from the PD controller size, and it ranges from 0 to 1, and basically that determines how much of a hit chance bonus frag warheads get. All missiles have size 0.
In the stats here, or is that just one of those little hidden
I do not believe it is listed. However, all missiles are size 0, so Blast-Frag works against them the same as it did before the update.
You just get bonus hit chance for hitting your smaller craft. Pikes being smallest.
You only get a bonus for hitting craft. The pike has a size of 0.6. Both fighters have a size of 0.75. And as I've said previously, both bombers and the sundial will get a size of 1, which means they get the full 40% percentage point bonus. So, for example, if you
look at our
if you have a
here.
Blast-Frag warhead with a 50% chance to hit head-on, if that's versus a bomber, you get 40% on top of that, which means you have a 90% chance to hit.
Very good odds then of killing off the larger threats, but not as good against those small ones.
Just by feeling it out, it's probably like roughly linear. So fighters get like a 30% roughly. But essentially what you need to know for your ACM design is that if you have EL, you're always guaranteed to hit, basically.
EL has that much higher hit rate. At the same time, EL is fucking expensive.
Yeah, it's got its worst aspect side on is 65%, so you might like very, very rarely miss side on versus fighters, but it's again very rare. But with Blast-Frag, rear on hits are guaranteed, I believe, always. At least I haven't seen one fail to damage. Side-on hits are rather shaky. Actually, even against bombers, it's 60%, so it's slightly better than a coin flip. And versus fighters, it's going to be a fair bit worse. And head-on is very solid. You might not get all of them, but you can generally expect it to hit head-on as well.
So, Chad, if your eyes glazed over, you can see why they're called Mathblob. Thank you for knowing the numbers and testing them well. Do we want to talk a little bit, because there was something you mentioned with different hit chances there that got me thinking. Is there use cases for EL Blast-Frags in, say, like small size ones? Because I'm looking at these things, and potentially a max warhead here, 6-point missile, but that can pen through the armor of a craft, versus the regular Blast-Frag would not.
Does that have an Act Seeker?
It does have an Act Seeker on it here.
Well, for a missile this expensive, you are probably going to want to bring command, just because that guarantees you are not going to get soft.
Now we're into the same budget range as Lunge was, although it is a smaller missile, so potentially
it is actually
base.
It is something you can use, but because of the Lunge existing and just being more performant. And generally, like, your outboard slots, you don't need a ton of lunges. Like, even if you have like 1 or 2 left, that is plenty of lunges.
Probably don't want that many on a fighter anyways. Like 1 to fire off when you start the engagement, and then maybe a second if you want to have it, but
generally ELS ones do allow you to 1-tap, of course, because it has a higher armor penetration value. This was changed relatively early in testing just to give EL more of an advantage, instead of the best way being just to always bring more Blast-Frag, because of course EL is very, very expensive. And
compare
also
costs for unit tier, Blast-Frag is 0.25 versus EL is 3.5, so you're paying your budget.
Yeah, and also let's, for example, if you really wanted to make an anti-fighter, if you really, really wanted to make an anti-fighter S2H, that actually makes it somewhat affordable at 16 points with a command seeker, instead of if you needed like the same size as Blast-Frag, which would cost like 24 points.
Let me see.
That's kind of a little change to make EL just more viable.
But you could probably in that. You could get that. Not quite. Damn. It's just short. Trying to get that for just enough to pen fighter craft and kill them, but weave on, it's just a little too expensive for that. Okay, without weave, you can do that for 16 points.
Yeah, you don't need weave versus craft. It's really a skiff only thing, because the
nose gun turret,
the nose guns on the fighters are going to fire a fair bit less frequently than the skiff, which has a turret that just goes.
So again, another use case of EL being one of these little techs for a cyclone. So you can consult Mathblob's guide for all this information as well. Pick it apart at your own leisure.
I don't actually have a section on the EL ones, and while they do work, it is just very, very expensive. And generally, unless you are super tube limited and absolutely need to kill like a couple of craft with a couple of tube slots, the best way to go about it is just to get a bunch of Actwig STMs and just spam them.
Yeah, because we compare like the 16-point cost to this versus taking, like 4 equivalent SDM tornadoes here, then, well.
Yeah.
So, a couple premium options you can do with your command Blast-Frag silliness. So, all right.
The S1s with EL or even base blast fragmentation, actually. The main use for these is on ships, which, especially small ships, which just might not have the space to
can't mount those
bring
lunges
a VLS2 or an arm launcher, and the lunges, of course, don't fit in a VLS. You can't bring them on ships at all, and so there you might have more of a reason to bring maybe a couple of these command ELs just to pop some fighters that are maybe trying to rocket you or SDU or
so
such.
Let's say you had like a shuttle with, say, a T-20, a Pavise, and a chaff box. You could potentially fit a couple of these like 9-point CMD Blast-Frag EL size ones into its banks, and then have those to pop a fighter that might be doing a run at it.
Yeah, that is one option. Another option, of course, is you can more or less repurpose your regular like max Blast-Frag Act S1s, which are 2 points each.
Yeah.
And if they're tuned for AMM use, they're going to have quite a low range versus fighters. So again, you're going to want to pay attention to like the no escape zones. So they'll need to be like sub 2K.
Yeah. So generally,
for those
AMM
to
range
reach out in
like,
time.
What, 3 kilometers or so, give or take.
Yeah, but like if they do decide to get close, you can just like fire a ton of these. And generally, if you just take a bunch of those 2-pointers, that is a pretty good defense for cappers.
Add just an option here to show that off. So it'd be like, we'd set these to be defensives. We could set them to target everything, conventionals, hybrids, or craft. Let's just set them to all salvo size 2, because that's standard for Blast-Frag max warhead. And then we just kit this thing out at like 3 kilometers with the best maneuverability or so we can fit. And then this would just be a case of, oh shit, there's a fighter coming at me. You can either Z target it, or you can have this thing fire off as that enters that no return zone.
Well, generally, like if there's a bunch of craft coming at you, you either just set max DOF, which means it'll just keep firing missiles,
keep dumping them,
salvo 3, or you just set salvo 3 and just spam Z-prio at them.
Chat's saying this is so complicated, you're dying. No wonder people worry testers have massive advantage. Yeah, don't worry about this. most of this stuff is just the hypothetical, and you can read the guides and pick it apart at your own pace. A lot of Nebulous ends up kind of getting figured out beforehand. You're just like, oh, okay, this is the device I load up with. This is kind of the understand the broad scope of it, but you can take this piece by piece and read through the guides as you desire, chat. So you don't have to make it as complicated.
S1s. Yeah. These S1s are also mentioned in the guide as well. There isn't a ton about these because S1s generally, they have very good engine performance. You don't need to be super careful with, is this going to hit or not?
Kind of set it to like, I'm going to have this much maneuverability and this much range. And
yeah.
Like exactly.
You don't need to be super careful with it for dedicated anti-craft missiles you might put on fighters. You do generally want to increase the speed a fair bit, unlike with AMMs, but yeah, I mean, it's a different problem you're tuning for.
Yeah, just kind of changing your parameters around a little bit. Also, worth mentioning, Shipyard channel is very nice for having people just kind of give exports. You can talk to other members of the community. They'll generally have something cooked up that you can just plug and play, and you don't have to do all this missile tuning. All of this stuff is entirely optional. You can just take an export and be like, yeah, this is mostly good enough. A lot of these Nebulous missiles is just kind of, you set it more or less in the direction, although some of the finer tunings chasing that last little 10% performance, that's kind of what we're getting into the weeds up here. So
yeah, the nice thing about these is that they can also double as AMMs. You can give them a bit more range, a bit more speed, which will make them slightly less effective, but especially on ANS, you don't need a ton of performance out of your AMMs because you're not facing hybrids. On OSP, it might get a bit trickier because these max 4-head S1s aren't especially great against S2Hs because they're relatively cheap and you still need to fire 2 of them.
Yeah, you still gotta try and consistently fire off that pair of them to take out that hybrid, whether it's size 2 or size 3.
But yeah, if you want to protect your cappers against craft and such, having a VLS and just, having your army missile, having your chaff, and just filling the rest of it up with 2-pointers, that is generally going to be a pretty competent defense.
Still pretty common build. Just grab a shuttle here. I mentioned the little T-20 cappers that you love to see in various fleets. Get this thing a Pavise, and then we'll get a chaff box as well. So you can see this thing. I think I had just a little parry. Here we go. Yeah, so some of the things I mentioned: steerable act radar, detect small targets, defensive, salvo size 2, hot launch, 3-kilometer range. We'll just grab one of these things and cram, I don't know, depending how many hybrids or craft you might think. So you get 8 of these things, and we'll give it a little bit of chaff and maybe some flares or something. Give it an arming missile or 2. There you go. That's a little capper boy here. So.
Flares are pretty. Flares do have much more of a use now because something that also even before the update has been kind of increasing in frequency is that if you have command missiles, you want to give them a backup so that if they're comms jammed, they'll just fly straight and
through,
and for example with high-speed S2s, you need to seduce that secondary seeker, especially in capitals, because once that missile's jammed out maybe 3 kilometers, 4 kilometers,
it's still right
basically a 300 meters a second rocket coming straight at you.
So we would see
you can't really dodge that super
command
well.
Hodge for hybrids, and they'd be like, all right, cool, comms jam you at whatever range, whether it's for the Acello's 4-kilometer comms jamming or the new jamming device, the name I forget, but the
Warbler has a 2.5k range.
2.5k.
So
it's still going to hit you, boss.
The Wake is the cheapest secondary seeker at 1/4 of a point, and so it's used pretty often along with, as you mentioned, Saw and Hodge. And then for a larger ship, it might very well be worth it to pack a couple of flares, just so that even if they use that seeker tech on you, the flares are going to be there, and the Wake is going to see the flares and pull itself off course.
So that way, if they want to go for that Wake secondary, then you're going to seduce that missile.
Yeah.
They'd have to pay for something like semi-active seeker or home on jam. So they're going to not be able to minimum price range it.
Yeah, generally it's always a mix of the 3, at least for high-end missile builds targeting full 3K fleets. But
again,
on a shuttle or something,
multiple flavors of ice cream all kind of combined together.
On a shuttle, you're probably not going to have comms jamming, so it's not really worth them to put them on small stuff.
We could just take
on big stuff.
Wanted, but
yeah, you pack a couple flares. It's niche, but it is it can come in very handy.
Reasonable little build here. I just whipped together 170 points, just kind of basic kit on it, but you get the pop gun for a little bit of flak if you want. You've got those AMMs to counter your hybrids or say craft that might be running up on you. just cute little things you can just plug into your fleets. They don't have to be super duper complicated. I think that's kind of one of the points I want to stress is that a lot of this can get very much in the weeds and seem like there's a lot of it, but when you take it piece by piece, you end up just saying, oh, I just include like a couple of these AMM style things in my fleet, and that works well enough because, you know, Blast-Frag is still Blast-Frag. All right.
Yeah.
I think that's enough of melting everybody's brain today, because I can tell that the chat is kind of just collectively going, whoa, as they're all information overloaded, but I don't know what your schedule is for today, but I know that in about 90 or so minutes, we're slated to do some nebulous nonsense with people doing kind of a event, a bit of a showcasing of just what people would be able to put together in the 24 hours they've had to kind of figure out and learn the patch, and then trying to play for a win there. So we'll be doing some casting. I'm not sure what you're up to for the rest of the day, Mathblob, if you want to stay on the show and do some games or what.
I probably won't be doing games in the course of like carrier testing and generally other factors. I've become kind of burnout at Nebulous, so I'm
Understandable.
taking a
Take your
bit of a
time
break.
and do your thing as you please. Yeah.
Mhm.
Anyways,
But I might be around at a future time.
All right. Well, we look forward to you then. So, hey, thanks for coming out on the show and providing kind of a guest lecture here as we're able to get some fun little nebulous nonsense melting everyone's mind with the wonderful math. To anyone who has not already looked at it, check the sticky in the chat right now. That is Mathblob's guide. You should read this. There's a bunch of other guides written by Vren and a couple other community figures. These have been passed around, and you should definitely go check them out. They have practiced and played carriers and know generally what they're talking about, so read up on those guides, and it'll explain a lot of the stuff that might seem very overwhelming. I know it seemed a little bit that way for me when I first started up looking into the fleet editor and being, oh, wow, that's a very big carrier page, but you can kind of like take it piece by piece and you'll understand it pretty quickly, so yeah. Right. Well, Blob, if you want to head out, then we can facilitate that, and yeah.
Yeah, sure. For those Max Warhead S1s, there's a very fun quote from Das, who kind of pioneered this strategy a bit, even though like it's not exactly like a big tuning or something, but what Das is pretty much the first person to decide, okay, I'm just going to bring a shitload of these on everything.
Alright.
And I asked him for like a little quote to put in the guide as well, and it's enough of these on a shuttle and you can stop God. And in many cases that is pretty accurate. I remember one game with snipes trying like with a flight of, I don't know, 12 or like 20 Tantos trying to hellbomb a single shuttle, and it kind of just stopped all of them with S1s and Pavis.
I believe that it's this one. I want to hang on. Let me just load up something here real quick, because I did have this idea before and people thought it was funny. So yeah, you can, if you want to, with a shuttle, you can give it 115 size one little Blast-Frag missiles like this. You probably shouldn't, but it's really funny. So yeah, it's your little defensive trick.
Yeah, if you can be very careful about like ganging a tight corner and then having craft come around, there are few ways I have had more fun in carrier testing than unmasking at like less than a kilometer from a bunch of craft with a 20mm gun and angle and just shooting them all down.
Yeah, so got to be careful about peeking corners on that, because if you wander into like Pavis or Defender range, you're going to realize just how fragile craft are to the good old deck CWIS.
Yep.
All right. Anyways, silly creatures and stuff aside. So yeah, I think that I'll try and load up into a lobby now. We should have enough time before the next ad break kicks in there. So yeah, thanks again for coming on to the show then, Mathblob.
It's been a pleasure.
All right. And yeah.